today we had a huge matchup as Liren, who might become World Chess Champion in April if he wins the World Chess Championship, played against Indian chess prodigy Praggnanandhaa. This guy is 17 years old. He's 2684. I mean, he's super strong. And he's beaten Magnus Carlsen in the past. I mean, the future of Praggnanandhaa is so bright, and it's always so exciting to follow his games. Now, the game was super exciting, and it went like this. Liren started with e4. We can see that Liren is 2800. He's right now rated number 2 in the world. Like, his rating is insane. So e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6. This became an Italian, one of the most famous chess openings in the world. There's so much theory in this. Castles, knight f6, d3, and here the idea is just simply that you're trying to go d4 at some point as white, and you're just trying to get the center, you're trying to develop all your pieces. And yeah, a6, the idea is to go b5, rook e1, bishop a7, so that whenever white goes d4, the bishop is not under attack. A4, stopping b5, castles, h3, stopping bishop g4. This is all theory. You don't want the bishop to come in here and pin the knight. That can be a little bit annoying. So bishop e6 is what black played instead. And then we just saw an exchange of bishops, bishop e3, and another exchange of bishops. And now if you look at this position, it looks kind of funny because there's these double pawns, but black also has these double pawns. So, I mean, both white and black are trying to play d4 and d5. Like, both colors have, like, a great center. So, yeah, this is the plan of both players. And black started here by going a5 just to make sure that, you know, Liren couldn't stop, like, going b4 and couldn't go, like, expanding on his queen side too much. So, yeah, this is a pretty common idea to do. Knight bd2, developing the knight, and queen d7, so that whenever there's this d5 push, which there has to be, this is the main idea here is black, you can bring in your rooks to the defense as well. It's always good to get all your pieces out before you start going for, you know, big pawn breaks or something. Always good. So queen b3, putting pressure on b7, b6, defending the pawn. Now rook a1, bringing in the rooks in the game as well. King h8, so that the king is not in the same diagonal as the queen whenever d5 happens. Once again, we're just seeing both players preparing their big pawn break. Queen b5, pinning the knight. I mean, in the sense that if the knight moves, there's going to be a queen exchange. And that is what happened. Actually, Praggnanandhaa said, I want to exchange queens. He went knight d8, exchanging queens. And now, guys, this position after a queen exchange is very, very, very equal. I mean, it's very equal. Because it's completely equal material and both white and black have a really good center. So finally, after the queen exchange, the pawn push happened, d4. This is now the start of a pawn break. So Praggnanandhaa's idea was that he wanted to move his knight around to f7. He's just rerouting the knight. This game is a lot about rerouting at this point, trying to get the pieces to the best squares possible. And yeah, the idea of this is that you're defending a little bit on e5. You're stopping black from going knight g5 or anything like that. And the knight is pretty well placed here. This is a good spot for the knight. If the knight was in c6, it could get kicked away from with d5 or something. So knight f7 makes a lot of sense. And now white played king f2. I mean, the king is just trying to get into the game. It makes a lot of sense. But because the king went onto this f-file, there are some tactics going on as there is a rook and, you know, there is a knight and the knight g5 was played. This knight is pinned right now. Knight takes g5 is obviously not possible. So Praggnanandhaa was really just trying to exchange a lot of pieces in this position. But actually what we can notice is that this pawn on e4 is a little bit of a weakness right now. This pawn on e4 is definitely more weak than what the pawn on e6 is at this moment in time. But still, this is a very similar or a very equal position. So king e2, getting the king out of the way. Knight takes f3. Praggnanandhaa wanted to exchange the knights. Knight takes, and now knight f6, threatening this pawn. Like I said, this pawn is weak right now. So white had to go knight d2 to defend it. And then king g8, getting the king closer to the center. We want to have the king in the center in all endgames. So rook f1, putting the rook in an open file. Rook f e8, saying, hey, I don't want to exchange rooks. I'm going to keep my rook over here. Rook f3, trying to double up rooks on the f file. Rook d8. g4. Great move, because the idea of this is at some point to maybe go g5. And white is trying to get a little bit of space here on the king side. And now finally black went for its own pawn push. d5. This is a move that had to happen at one point or another. So d5. And now we have the situation where there's a lot of tension in the center. I mean, there's a lot of pawns that are hanging. In fact, right now, this pawn on e5 is immediately hanging. So pawn takes pawn could happen, but then there might be knight takes e4. So this pawn is hanging, this pawn is hanging. There's several pawns that are hanging at this moment in time. So rook f1. White decided to bring the rook back. Now, I mean, the idea of this is just to keep all the pieces together, and it's also to maybe be able to go knight f3 at some point later on. So I mean, it kind of makes sense. Like, maybe it's not the most active move, but it kind of makes sense. And here black captured on d4 with the idea that after captures there is d takes e4, and now it's crucial that white goes g5, kicking away the knight so that, you know, black doesn't end up being a pawn up. But now black has this fantastic square on d5, and that was the idea of going for all of these exchanges of pawns to free up this square for the knight. And this is now great, because if we just take a look right now, if we just look at this position, actually, black is now slightly better, because black just has better squares for their pieces, for their knight. So this knight right here, it's going to places. I mean, this knight is jumping up to b4. This knight is going to be a fantastic piece over here. This is going to be a great outpost because there's no pawn that can kick it away. So this knight is just absolutely fantastic. And yes, is this pawn going to become a little weakness? Yes, but the king is so close to defending it that it's actually not that big of a deal. So black is slightly better actually now in this endgame. So knight takes e4, it's crucial, and now black, before moving the knight or anything else, decides to go e5 to get rid of that weak pawn that I was talking about. Because the pawn over here, it was slightly weak. So it's better to get rid of it if you can. Now, after e5, rook f5 was played, threatening the pawn, and knight b4. Now the knight is going to the square it wanted to. This is the square it belongs to. This is fantastic. Sometimes there's even knight c2 putting pressure on that pawn. This pawn now might become weak. So d takes e5 was played, and now rook takes d1, an exchange, and knight d3. Now this pawn is weak, so now black is going to capture this pawn, and you cannot really defend it. So king c2, threatening the knight, knight takes pawn, and knight d2. So now once again we have this position, but once again black is slightly better here because it's 3 versus 2 on the queen side, which is good. I mean, you have a pawn majority, which is what we call it. We have a pawn majority on the queen side, which means that pretty much in pawn endgames, a lot of times black will be winning, especially if the king is like very far away. This will be very advantageous for black, because black will always be able to get a passed pawn. But not only that, this pawn on e3 is now weak. This pawn is very weak. There's no pawn that can defend it. And it's going to be really annoying for white to defend this pawn. But not only that, I mean, this knight has a lot better squares. It has this outpost. This knight does not have any outpost. So there's several factors that make this position be slightly better for black, even if it's an endgame that is equal material. And at this level that we're seeing, everything that black is trying to do right now is just to win a pawn. If black is able to win a pawn, and is able to like continue on those slight advantages that they have, they're probably going to win the game. Which, you know, at lower levels, it might be hard. You might have these advantages, but it's like hard to convert. But these people are so good, they're able to convert the slightest advantage. So here, rook e6 was played. The idea is simply to get the rook active and sort of ask the king, where are you going to go? This king is not doing so great either. King is pretty weak. So rook f4. And actually, this move, rook f4, it allows for this move, rook c6. And now it really becomes clear that the king is very weak. Because if the king goes now to d1, there's going to be knight d3 threatening the rook and threatening this pawn on b2. So actually his move rook f4 wasn't really fantastic because it allows for these things. And the king does not really want to go to b1 because there's knight d3. I mean, this is the best thing that they can do now, but there's knight d3 and the king is quite weak right now. Rook d4 was played, rook c1 check, king is now forced all the way to a2, but now we can see that the king is very far away from the center. In endgames, you want to have the king in the center. The king is very far away now. This king is a lot closer, and that is yet again another slight advantage that black has. Knight b4 check, the knight is coming back to its favorite square, king b3, and now the king started pushing, king f7. Now, in this position, the reason why the engine thinks that king f8 is better than king f7 is because king f7 allows for knight f3, and this knight can actually become really strong on e5. But actually, after king f7, white played knight c4 instead of knight f3, and there's actually a slight difference, which is that now black can play king g6, which is very nice. In this position, if white would have gone knight f3, king g6, then there would be h4, and the knight would be much better placed here than what it would be over on c4. So the knight would just be better placed. It would make more sense for the knight to be here. So actually, and these are the sort of things that you're like, okay, it doesn't matter, but actually at this level, it matters. So yeah, knight c4, slight inaccuracy, king g6, and now h4. But like I said, the knight would rather be here on f3 instead of on c4. King h5. Now, the king is going to be trying to put some attack on this h4 pawn. And now, once again, the reason why this knight is so badly placed on c4 is also because it's not defending the pawn anymore, right? So now there is this idea of going rook, well, first rook e1, threatening the pawn, but at some point going rook h1 and trying to threaten that pawn. And we can see now how white's pawns are just so weak. So rook e4, rook h1, this is just fantastic play. And now Liren played knight d7, which, I mean, it makes sense. The reason why he didn't play knight f3 is because there's rook h3 and the knight is getting kicked away. But we can see that this now changes the game a lot because now there's going to be rook takes h4 and black has won a pawn. And this is now huge. This is now really big. I mean, Praggnanandhaa has literally outplayed Liren. It's crazy. The idea of going knight d7 is that you're able to bring the rook up to e7, and now these pawns are kind of weak. King takes g5, rook takes g7, and now the king goes back to h6, defending on h7. Rook comes back, king g5. It's because, you know, you want to have the king on g5 because now if rook g7 check, then you can go king f5 and you're going to be bringing the king up. So knight f8 with the idea of threatening this pawn, but now the pawn can just push. I mean, this pawn is a passed pawn that's going to become so strong. The king is so far away, the knight and the rook are not coordinating well, and it's really hard to stop the pawn. I mean, I find it beautiful. Rook takes c7, the king was able to capture this pawn, and well, we're seeing a little bit of some reshuffling of pieces, but the point is that black is just trying to keep that pawn on the h-file, and well, now black also wanted to keep this pawn, knight f4, h4, and here we're just seeing that ultimately, just a little bit of reshuffling of moves, ultimately it becomes really hard to stop this h-pawn. I mean, white is doing anything to try to attack it, but there's always going to be ways of defending the rook and then bringing the knight to its protection. So king d7, it's also really nice how black is trying to cut off the king. If you guys are realizing this king is now cut off. The king cannot come up in here anymore. The rook is stopping like the king from going up over here. So black is trying right now to cut off the king so that it cannot come into like the protection of this. And like, what is the king doing here? The king is too far away right now. So king f3, now black is going to try to promote with the knight and the king. Rook has to move. Rook d5 check, king e6, knight e3, defending the rook, knight g1, king e4, just trying to, just defending, and trying once again, the king is being cut off right now. Something like king f2 would also be good, but then there's going to be knight h3 check, so black is also just trying to get out of the checks. Knight h3, rook d4. The king cannot move. White's king cannot move. So b3, white has nothing to do. And then rook b4. Now black is just saying, okay, let me pick up these pawns. I mean, you're kind of stuck with your pieces. It's really nice. This rook cannot check black's king. The rook, I mean, if it goes there, like, you know, it doesn't really matter. It's really pretty. So rook f6, king d3. Now in the protection of this pawn, getting the king to a good square as well. There's no rook checks or anything. And soon black will go rook takes b3. And actually here, white played king e5. And Praggnanandhaa just said, fork. Well, actually, Liren resigned after king e5 because he realized that there was a fork. But, you know, Praggnanandhaa could have gone knight g4 fork or knight g4 check, which is a fork, winning the rook. And this would just be completely game over. So actually, I don't really know the circumstances of why Liren went into this fork. I don't know if it was low on time or if it was just sort of as a resignation sort of move because he knew he was dead lost. But even if he didn't go up here, this is a dead lost position. This is completely winning. I mean, I can just show you, I don't know, I can just show you maybe a couple moves, but this pawn is going to be falling. And I mean, this pawn will be falling as well. That is the thing. Like, white will lose all their pawns. This pawn will not fall. And whilst this pawn is still here, white is basically just forced to control it. Like, black is just dominating the position because white just cannot do anything. So it would have been super lost anyways. And yeah, Praggnanandhaa beat Liren. It's a huge result for a 17-year-old. But I mean, he's such a big chess prodigy, and it's going to be so fun to see what the future holds for him. Liren is also known for being very, very solid. So getting a win against Liren with the black pieces is like insane. Really cool to see.